Hello everyone, I'm the Story Keeper, and I'm here to help you relax and fall asleep. Before we get into it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time is it where you're watching? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to know. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, relax, and let the story unfold through me. Ranger Emily Carter had always found the solitude of Sequoia National Park comforting. The park's vast, untouched wilderness offered a refuge from the noise of the outside world, its lakes, trails, and forests stretching endlessly beneath the open sky. Her favorite spot in the park was Clearwater Lake, a remote, pristine body of water tucked into the farthest corner of the preserve. Few visitors made the trek there due to its isolation, but that was part of its charm. That evening, Emily stood on the lake's northern shore, the light of a waxing moon shimmering on the glassy surface. The air was cool, the faint scent of pine carried on a soft breeze. She had come to Clearwater to conduct her usual patrol, ensuring the area remained undisturbed. The sun had set hours ago, but the moonlight provided enough illumination to navigate the well-worn trail along the lake's edge. She sipped from her thermos, the coffee lukewarm but comforting. The night was peaceful, the kind of quiet that settled deep into her bones. The forest hummed faintly with life, the rustle of small animals, the occasional hoot of an owl. The lake, however, was utterly still, its surface unbroken. As Emily turned to head back to her truck, something caught her eye. A faint light flickered beneath the water near the center of the lake. She stopped, narrowing her eyes. The glow was soft, pulsating like the slow rhythm of a heartbeat. For a moment, she thought it might be a reflection of the moon, but the light was too localized and far too vibrant, a deep, bluish green that seemed to ripple outward in gentle waves. Emily set her thermos on a nearby rock and crouched at the water's edge. The glow faded, then returned, stronger this time. It almost seemed alive, as though it were drawing her attention. She leaned closer, her breath catching as the light began to shift, forming what appeared to be a swirling spiral pattern beneath the surface. Her radio crackled, breaking her trance. She jumped, fumbling for the device clipped to her belt. "This is Ranger Carter," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden spike of adrenaline. "Hey, Emily," came the familiar voice of her colleague Jake. "Just checking in. You still out at Clearwater?" "Yeah," she replied, glancing back at the water. The light had disappeared, leaving the lake as still and dark as before. "Just finishing up. All quiet out there." Emily hesitated. "Yeah, quiet. All right. Stay safe," Jake said before the radio went silent. Emily clipped the device back to her belt, her eyes lingering on the water. The light hadn't been her imagination, she was sure of it. But what could it have been? Bioluminescent algae were rare in freshwater lakes, especially at this altitude, and Clearwater was fed by underground springs, its waters icy even in the summer. She waited a few more minutes, scanning the lake for any sign of the glow, but the surface remained dark. Finally, she grabbed her thermos and headed back to her truck, the faint unease in her chest refusing to fade. The following day, Emily couldn't shake the image of the lights. She spent her morning sorting through park records, digging up old reports about Clearwater Lake. Most entries were routine: fishing regulations, water quality assessments, a few notes on wildlife sightings. But one file caught her attention. It was an incident report from 5 years earlier. A camper had claimed to hear strange noises coming from the lake at night, soft, melodic tones that seemed to rise and fall like a song. The ranger on duty at the time had dismissed the account, attributing it to overactive imagination or an unusual bird call. Emily leaned back in her chair, frowning. She had been a ranger long enough to know that strange occurrences in the wilderness were often rooted in mundane explanations. But she couldn't ignore the way the light had moved, how it had seemed intentional. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Jake appeared in the doorway, a steaming mug in his hand. "Morning," he said, leaning against the frame. "You're looking awfully serious for someone who just spent a peaceful night at Clearwater." Emily offered a half-smile. Something weird happened out there. Weird how? She hesitated, debating whether to tell him. Jake was a good friend, but he had a tendency to be skeptical about anything that strayed too far from the ordinary. "I saw some lights," she said finally, "in the water. They were strange." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Bioluminescence? I don't think so. It didn't look natural. It was more like..." She trailed off, searching for the right words. "Like it was alive." Jake sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe you've been spending too much time out there." "Maybe," Emily said, though she didn't believe it. That evening, Emily returned to Clearwater Lake. The thought of the lights had lingered in her mind all day, and she couldn't resist the urge to investigate further. She packed a few essentials: flashlight, notebook, and a small camera before heading out. The lake was even quieter than usual when she arrived, the air heavy with stillness. The moon was higher now, casting long shadows over the water. Emily set her pack down near the same rock as the night before and waited, her eyes scanning the surface. The minutes stretched into an hour. Emily began to think she had imagined the whole thing when the glow returned. It started faint, barely visible beneath the surface, but quickly grew brighter. This time, it wasn't confined to one spot. Multiple lights appeared, flickering and swirling in unison, their movements hypnotic. Emily's heart raced as she grabbed her camera, snapping a few photos. She doubted they would capture the full effect, but she had to try. The lights began to pulse, their rhythm slow and deliberate. Emily crouched closer to the water, her breath catching, as she realized she could hear something faint and almost melodic hum that seemed to emanate from the lake itself. She leaned in further, her hand brushing the water's edge. The hum grew louder, more defined, the tones overlapping like a haunting, otherworldly song. It wasn't unpleasant, in fact. It was beautiful. But there was something about it that made her skin prickle, an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite place. Suddenly, the lights vanished, leaving the lake dark once more. Emily stayed by the water for a long time, hoping the lights would return. But the lake remained still, the melody fading into silence. She packed up her things and began the trek back to her truck, her mind racing. The lights, the song, it was no coincidence. Something was happening beneath the surface of Clearwater Lake, something she didn't understand, and she was determined to find out what. The following morning, Emily sat at the ranger station, replaying the events of the previous night in her mind. She had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by the glowing lights and the melodic hum that had filled the air. There was no doubt in her mind now something extraordinary was happening at Clearwater Lake. She flipped through the photos on her camera, but the images didn't do the scene justice. The lights were faint. They glowed diffused by the water, and the swirling patterns were barely visible. Frustrated, she closed the camera and leaned back in her chair. "Still thinking about your mystery lights?" Jake asked as he walked into the office, a cup of coffee in hand. Emily glanced up, offering a tired smile. "Yeah, went back out last night. They showed up again." Jake raised an eyebrow, setting his coffee down. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Emily said. "And there's more. I heard something like a song. It wasn't just a noise, Jake. It was beautiful, but strange." Jake leaned against the desk, his expression skeptical but curious. "A song?" Emily nodded. "It came from the lake, I'm sure of it." Jake rubbed his chin, considering her words. "Okay, let's say you're right. What do you think it is? Some kind of underwater current? Gas pockets? Algae?" Emily shook her head. It didn't feel natural. It felt alive. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jake studied her for a moment before sighing. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Nope," Emily said, her smile returning. "Oh, right," Jake said. "But if you're heading back out there, you're not going alone." That evening, Emily and Jake arrived at Clearwater Lake, the sun sinking low on the horizon. Jake had brought along a handheld sonar divisor tool the rangers occasionally used to measure water depth and check for underwater obstructions. Emily carried her camera and notebook, determined to document whatever they found. The lake was calm, its surface reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Jake set up the sonar on the shore while Emily scanned the water with her camera. "You're sure this is where you saw them?" Jake asked, adjusting the sonar's settings. "Positive," Emily said. They were right in the center of the lake. Jake frowned, watching the sonar screen as it displayed the lake's topography, depths consistent with what we've got on record. No major anomalies so far. Emily crouched near the water, her eyes fixed on the surface. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, and the first stars were beginning to appear. The lake remained dark, the stillness broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish. Then, as if on cue, the lights returned. "Jake," Emily whispered, motioning toward the water. He looked up, his eyes widening as the glow appeared in the lake's center. The lights pulsed faintly, their bluish-green hue illuminating the water in rhythmic waves. Emily grabbed her camera, snapping photos while Jake stared, speechless. "That's not algae," he said finally. "No kidding," Emily muttered, her attention focused on the lights. The hum began, a moment later, soft and melodic, rising and falling in a hauntingly beautiful cadence. Jake's expression shifted from curiosity to unease as the sound filled the air. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Emily nodded, her pulse quickening. The song was clearer tonight, its tones overlapping in a way that felt deliberate, almost purposeful. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for them, that the lake was calling to them. Without thinking, she stepped into the water, the icy chill biting at her skin. Jake grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "I need to get closer," Emily said, her voice trembling. Jake shook his head. "We don't know what's down there." "Exactly," Emily said, pulling away. "We need to find out." Emily waded deeper into the lake, the water rising to her knees. The lights seemed to respond to her presence, growing brighter and swirling faster. The song grew louder, the tones resonating in her chest like a second heartbeat. "Emily!" Jake called from the shore. "This isn't safe." She turned to reassure him, but froze as she noticed something beneath the surface. The lights weren't just floating aimlessly, they were moving in a deliberate pattern, tracing the outline of something massive and angular. "Jake," she said, her voice shaking. "There's something down there." Jake stepped to the water's edge, shining his flashlight onto the lake. The beam reflected off the glowing lights, revealing faint outlines of stone structures beneath the surface. Emily's breath caught as she realized what she was seeing. It was a building. The structure was enormous, its walls covered in intricate carvings that glowed faintly in the water. The lights swirled around it, illuminating its details a series of archways, towering columns, and what appeared to be an altar at its center. The design was unlike anything Emily had ever seen, its style ancient and otherworldly. "This isn't possible," Jake said, his voice hushed. Emily turned to him, her heart racing. "We have to get a closer look." Jake hesitated, glancing between her and the lake. "Emily, we don't know what this is. It could be dangerous." "I know," she said, "but we can't ignore it." Reluctantly, Jake nodded. "All right. But we're doing this carefully." They returned to the station to gather supplies, including a small inflatable raft and additional lighting equipment. By the time they returned to the lake, the lights had dimmed and the Somme had faded into silence. The structure remained visible beneath the surface, its faint glow an eerie reminder of what they had seen. Jake inflated the raft while Emily secured their gear, her hands trembling with anticipation. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to the structure as though it was calling her. As they paddled out to the lake's center, the lights began to pulse again, their rhythm slower now, almost like a heartbeat. The Somme returned, softer this time, its melody weaving through the night air. "This is incredible," Emily whispered, her eyes fixed on the glowing structure below. Jake nodded, his skepticism fading as he took in the sight. "I've never seen anything like this." They anchored the raft above the structure, the water glowing faintly around them. Emily lowered a waterproof camera into the lake, its live feed displaying the structure in stunning detail. The carvings on the walls were intricate, depicting scenes of what appeared to be humanoid figures surrounded by swirling patterns of light. "Do you see that?" Emily asked, pointing to the screen. "Those carvings, they look like people." Jake frowned, leaning closer. "People surrounded by light," he said. "Or maybe the light is part of them." Emily's chest tightened as the song grew louder, its tones resonating through the water and into the raft. For the first time, she felt a flicker of fear, sense that they were intruding on something ancient and sacred. "What do you think it means?" Jake asked. Emily shook her head. "I don't know, but I think we're about to find out." The lights flared suddenly, their glow engulfing the raft. Emily and Jake shielded their eyes as the Somme reached a crescendo, its haunting melody reverberating through their bodies. The water beneath them churned, the surface rippling as though something was rising from the depths. And then, as quickly as it had started, the light faded, leaving the lake calm and silent once more. Emily and Jake exchanged a stunned glance, the weight of what they had witnessed settling over them. "We're not alone out here," Emily said softly. Jake nodded, his expression grim. "No, we're not." The morning after their discovery, Emily sat at the ranger station's desk, staring at the footage they had captured from the lake. The waterproof camera had provided a detailed view of the submerged structure, and the carvings were clearer than she could have hoped. The humanoid figures etched into the stone appeared to be in motion, their hands raised towards swirling patterns of light. The artistry was breathtaking, but what struck her most was the emotion in the figures' expressions: reverence, awe, and perhaps even fear. Jake entered the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He set one down beside her and pulled up a chair, his face lined with fatigue. "You've been at this all night, haven't you?" Emily nodded, taking a sip from her mug. "I couldn't stop. The carvings there trying to tell us something." Jake leaned forward, examining the screen. "They look like they're worshipping the light, or maybe they're interacting with it." "Exactly," Emily said. "But what is the light, and why does it feel alive?" Jake didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen, his brow furrowed. "I've been thinking about that psalm we heard. It wasn't just random noise. It had structure, melody, rhythm, like it was communicating." Emily nodded. "I felt the same way. It wasn't just sound, it was emotion. It was pulling us in." Jake sat back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "If that's true, then this isn't just an archaeological discovery. We're dealing with something intelligent." Later that afternoon, Emily and Jake returned to the lake with a plan. Emily was determined to get a closer look at the carvings, and Jake had reluctantly agreed to accompany her. They brought wetsuits, dive gear, and an underwater flashlight, along with a portable sonar device to map the structure. The lake was quiet when they arrived, its surface a mirror reflecting the grey clouds overhead. Emily's heart raced as they loaded the raft, her anticipation tempered by a nagging sense of unease. The lake felt different today, heavier, as though it were watching them. "You sure about this?" Jake asked as they paddled toward the center of the lake. Emily nodded, her resolve firm. "We need answers, Jake, and we're not going to find them sitting on the shore." Jake didn't argue, though his expression remained tense. The lights began to glow as they anchored the raft above the structure. The pulsating rhythm was slower today, almost hesitant, and the psalm was fainter, a distant echo that seemed to emanate from the depths. Emily donned her wetsuit and checked her gear, the weight of the oxygen tank pressing reassuringly against her back. Jake adjusted her straps, his voice low. "If anything feels off, you come back up immediately." "Got it? Got it," Emily said, flashing him a reassuring smile. She slipped into the water, the cold shocking against her skin even through the wetsuit. The lake was eerily silent beneath the surface, the only sounds the faint hiss of her regulator and the rhythmic thud of her heartbeat. She switched on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the murky water to reveal the massive stone structure below. The carvings were even more intricate up close. Emily ran her gloved hand over the stone, her fingers tracing the swirling patterns of light etched into the surface. The figures seemed almost alive, their expressions so vivid that she could imagine them moving. The light pulsed around her, its glow illuminating the carvings in waves. Emily felt a strange sense of connection, as though the structure were reaching out to her. The melody of the psalm grew louder in her mind, resonating in a way that was both beautiful and unsettling. She swam toward the center of the structure, where the altar stood. It was a raised platform surrounded by smaller carvings, their designs radiating outward like ripples on a pond. At the center of the altar was a circular depression, its edges lined with symbols that glowed faintly in the light. Emily hesitated, her hand hovering over the depression. The melody in her mind grew more urgent, the tones overlapping in a cascade of sound. It felt as though the lake were urging her forward, compelling her to act. On the surface, Jake monitored the sonar, his brow furrowed. The device displayed the structure in detail, its angular outlines stark against the murky background. But something else was moving, something large, circling the structure with deliberate precision. "Emily," he said into the radio, his voice tight. "You've got company down there." Her voice crackled back, calm but curious. "What kind of company?" "I'm not sure," Jake said, watching the sonar intently. "It's big, and it's moving toward you." Emily turned, her flashlight sweeping through the water. For a moment, she saw nothing but the structure and the soft glow of the lights. Then, a shadow moved at the edge of her vision, a dark shape gliding silently through the water. Her pulse quickened as the shadow grew closer, resolving into the outline of a massive figure. It was humanoid in shape, but its movements were fluid, almost otherworldly. Its body shimmered faintly in the light, its form both solid and ethereal. The creature stopped a few feet away, its eyes glowing faintly with the same bluish-green hue as the lights. Emily froze, her mind racing. The creature made no aggressive moves, its gaze steady and calm. Instead, it raised a hand gesture that seemed almost welcoming. Jake's voice crackled in her ear. "Emily, what's going on? Talk to me." "It's here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I think it's guarding the structure." The creature tilted its head, its eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. It reached out, its hand brushing against the altar. The lights around them flared, the melody rising to a crescendo that filled Emily's mind with an overwhelming sense of connection and understanding. The carvings on the altar began to glow, their symbols shifting and rearranging into patterns she didn't recognize. The creature gestured toward her, its movements deliberate and measured. Emily hesitated, her instincts warring with her curiosity. Then, slowly, she placed her hand on the altar. The light engulfed her, and the world disappeared. For a moment, Emily was weightless, suspended in a void of swirling light and sound. Images flashed before her, scenes of the lake as it had once been, vibrant and alive. She saw figures moving through the water, their forms glowing with the same ethereal light as the creature. They weren't just guarding the structure, they were its creators, its caretakers. Then the images shifted, and she saw the lake in turmoil. Darkness crept across its surface, suffocating the light and silencing the song. The caretakers vanished, leaving only the structure behind a beacon, waiting for someone to find it. The light faded, and Emily found herself back in the lake, her hand still on the altar. The creature was watching her, its expression unreadable. She felt a wave of emotion emanating from it: gratitude, sadness, and something that felt like hope. As Emily surfaced, gasping for air, Jake pulled her into the raft. "What happened down there?" he asked, his voice urgent. Emily looked at him, her eyes wide. "The lake, it's alive, Jake, and it's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" he asked. "For us," she said. "To protect us." The drive back to the ranger station was quiet. Emily stared out the passenger side window, her mind replaying the images and sensations she had experienced beneath the surface of Clearwater Lake. The connection she'd felt to the light, the creature, and the structure had been profound, so much more than a discovery. It was a plea for help, a call to action. Jake broke the silence, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "So, are you going to tell me what happened down there?" Emily glanced at him, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. "It wasn't just a structure, Jake. It's a part of the lake, of the forest. It's alive, and it's been waiting for someone to listen." Jake frowned. "Waiting for what? For you?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I think it's been waiting for someone to protect it. The creature down there, it's not just guarding the structure, it's part of it, part of whatever's keeping the lake alive." Jake let out a slow breath. "You're serious? I've never been more serious in my life," Emily said, "and I don't think we can ignore it." Back at the station, they spread out their notes, sketches, and footage across the desk, trying to piece together the bigger picture. The sonar scans revealed the full extent of the submerged structure, sprawling complex that extended far beyond what they had seen. The carvings, the light, the creaturette, all pointed to something ancient and intelligent, something deeply connected to the natural world. Emily tapped a sketch of the altar, her finger tracing the symbols etched into the stone. "I think this is the key," she said. "The markings there are not just decorative, they're telling a story." Jake leaned over the desk, studying the sketch. "A story about what?" "About balance," Emily said. "The light is part of the lake, and the lake is part of the forest. If one of them is destroyed, the rest will follow." Jake sat back, rubbing his temples. That's a lot to unpack. Emily nodded, her expression grim. It is, but there's more. When I touched the altar, I saw something of vision. The lake wasn't always like this. There were others, like the creature we saw, and they were the ones who built the structure. They protected the lake, but then something changed. Darkness came, and the others disappeared. The creature we saw, it's the last one left. Jake's jaw tightened, and now it wants us to protect the lake. I think it doesn't have a choice, Emily said. It's reaching out because it's running out of time. The implications were staggering. If the lake truly was alive, if the creature and the light were part of a delicate ecosystem that had sustained the forest for centuries, then protecting it wasn't just a responsibility, it was a necessity. But the question remained, how? Emily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her radio crackling to life. She grabbed it, her pulse quickening. "This is Ranger Carter. Go ahead." "Hey, Emily, it's Mills," came the voice of another ranger. "Got some hikers out near Clearwater reporting something weird. Said they heard strange noises coming from the lake." Emily's stomach sank. What kind of noises? "Melodic, like singing," Mills said. "They're pretty spooked. You want me to head out there?" Emily glanced at Jake, who shook his head. "No, I've got it," she said. "Tell them to stay clear of the area for now." "Will do," Mills said. "Stay safe out there." Emily set the radio down, her mind racing. If more people were noticing the lake's behavior, it was only a matter of time before word spread. And once that happened, the lake's secrets wouldn't stay hidden for long. By the time they returned to Clearwater, the sky was dark and the forest was silent. The lake's surface shimmered faintly in the moonlight, the glowing lights beneath its surface more subdued than before. The melody was still there, but it was softer now, almost mournful. Emily and Jake stood at the water's edge, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. "If we don't act now, people are going to find this place," Jake said. "And you know what happens when something like this gets out. Tourists, scientists, media it'll be a circus." Emily nodded. "And the lake won't survive that. It's too delicate. Whatever's keeping it alive, it depends on balance. If we disrupt it," she didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what was at stake. They spent the next few hours setting up a perimeter around the lake. Jake placed warning signs and roped off the trail leading to the shore, while Emily updated the park's records to mark the area as restricted. It was a temporary solution, but it would buy them time to figure out a more permanent plan. As dawn broke over the horizon, the lake seemed to calm, its lights fading into the depths. Emily stood on the shore, her hands in her pockets, as Jake joined her. "So, what now?" he asked. "We protect it," Emily said simply. "We make sure no one disturbs it, no matter what." Jake nodded, his expression resolute. "All right, but you know this won't be easy." "It never is," Emily said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But it's worth it." The days that followed were quiet, the lake returning to its usual stillness. Emily and Jake patrolled the area regularly, ensuring the restrictions were enforced. Word of the strange lights and sounds faded, replaced by the usual hum of park life. But Emily knew the lake's secrets would never truly be safe. The balance it depended on was fragile, its survival tied to forces they barely understood. And while the creature continued to watch over the structure, it couldn't do so forever. One evening, as Emily stood by the water's edge, she felt the familiar pull of the lake, the quiet hum of its melody, the faint glow of its light. She placed a hand over her heart, the memory of the creature's gaze and the vision it had shared etched into her mind. We'll keep you safe, she whispered. I promise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lake glowed faintly, its lights pulsating in a rhythm that felt almost like gratitude. The melody rose softly, weaving through the air like a lullaby. Emily closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, a quiet reminder of the responsibility she had taken on. The lake would endure, for now, and so would its guardian.